Jim's grandmother reminds people of the Garden of Eden Christmas connection by giving out what she, I forget what the rest of it is. Something about something about forbidden fruit cake or something like that. I don't know why it always cuts off the bottom, but somebody could figure that out. All right, let's check our work for today, beginning with page 96. You have a question, Stephen?
See that bottom bar where all those like chrome's at? To the left.
Over here?
Yeah. That's what cuts it off. Because there's like a bottom bar that where you can put like stuff there.
Oh, I don't think I can take that bottom bar
No,
away.
you can't.
You can put it on the side. You can put it on the side.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, well maybe one of you can help me with that later. But now let's check our questions. Page 96, first of all. Check your own paper, please. If you have any question about your answer, if it varies with the answer that we give, make sure that you let us know. And at home, make sure that you have completed these before we go over them. Number 1 on page 96. The event that sparked the French and Indian War was what, Alex?
Washington's troops marching into illegal territory.
Yes. So you had to have something about George Washington going to clear the French out, or going into territory that the French occupied. Yes.
I said the attack on Fort Necessity and the skills that they have with them.
Okay, that's part of what happened there. A lot of different things you could mention as part of this. Yes.
I had his surrender at Fort Duquesne.
Yeah. Who's his?
George Washington.
Did you have George Washington?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Steve.
It said Washington and his troops killed 10 Frenchmen.
Okay.
Alright, just making sure.
All right. Number 2. The chief British disadvantage in the French and Indian War. Steph, what do you say?
The French and guerrilla warfare while the British fought in the open.
That was a disadvantage, but not the chief disadvantage, according to your text, unfortunately. What was the chief disadvantage, Jessica?
I have they didn't understand the Indians or guerrilla warfare.
No, that's not the chief one. Megan?
The lack of unity in the colony.
Exactly, the lack of unity in the colonies. How many of you had that? Okay, those are the careful readers. Look for the word chief in your reading. Okay, number 3. Why was Braddock defeated so decisively at Fort Duquesne? There's where the answer somebody had for number 2 would fit here. What do you have, Brady?
He was shot.
that tends to put a damper on a chance for victory. But no, that's not a good enough answer for here. Sarah?
I heard because he had his men fighting in the open, organized fashion that Europeans used rather than guerrilla warfare.
Exactly. Very good answer. Any questions about your answer? All right, number 4. What was William Pitt's 3-part plan to win the French and Indian War? We have 3 parts, 3 points. What's the first part of the plan, Michaela?
Let Prussia go to fighting in Prussia.
In Europe. Let Prussia bear the brunt of the fighting in Europe. So Prussia is going to handle stuff over the European theater. Okay, what's the second point? Devin?
Britain would use their navy to isolate French troops in America and India.
That is correct. So the British use of the navy was the second part of the plan. And what's the third part, Sally?
Replace the old generals.
Right. My answer is a little more descriptive. I kind of like it. He discarded the old, incompetent generals, our commanders, and replaced them with young, energetic soldiers who would lead the army to victory. Get those youngsters that have so much energy in there. All right, so 3 points. Any question about any of the 3 points? All right, number 5. The 2 greatest military commanders of the French and Indian War. We'll get 2 points for this as well. You're giving 2. So, Nate, who do you have?
James Wolfe and Marquis de Montcalm.
That is correct. And this wasn't part of your question, but do any of you remember for which side did James Wolfe fight? British. And what about Montcalm? what's the only side left? The French. Yeah. And he's called Marquis, that kind of gives you a clue too. All right, so then you had two more questions on page 96 that I put on the board. First was the city in which the treaty was signed, the treaty ending the war. Well, in what city was it signed? Lydia?
Paris is where the Treaty of Paris was signed and then
It's kind of a clue when it's called the Treaty of Paris, isn't it? Yeah, it's in Paris, right. Hope none of you missed that. And then the next question was the Indian chief who kept on fighting when the war was over. Who was that? Brady, you're going to give me another chance here.
Pontiac.
That is correct, Pontiac. Any questions about your answers on page 96? Joey, maybe you can check yours with Stephen as we proceed. Next is page 102. The first question is, what is the power of the purse? Hayden, what do you say about that?
I had the power of the purse meant that salaries and taxes for authorities had to pass scrutiny of office holders.
No, you're kind of close, but there's some things that are not quite correct about that. Haley, what do you have? Same thing. Let's see if I can heard from somebody. All right, Michaela.
I have like the same thing that I have.
All right, let's see if you've got it.
The power of the purse meant that salaries from royal officials, military institutions, and taxes had to pass scrutiny of office holders.
Of the elected office holders? Yeah. So it wasn't the officials that were getting paid that approved. It had to be the office holders, or with the elected office holders, which was the legislature, essentially. You could have said the power of the purse was the power of the elected legislature, the colonial legislatures, to control the money that was paid to officials. All right, any question about your answer? You need to have something about the elected officials or the colonial legislatures. All right, number two, why did Parliament establish the proclamation line of 1763? Lahana, what do you have for that one?
I said it was to diminish the conflict between the Indians. To diminish the conflict between the Indians, the Parliament established the proclamation line.
Okay, to diminish the conflict between,
Indians,
so between one Indian tribe and another?
between the colonists and
Yeah, you kind of needed to have that colonist part in there too. You had between, but you only had one side. We'll allow that because I think I know what you meant. But make sure when you put between that you have two different things. All right, so it's to diminish conflict between the colonists and the Indians. Any question about your answer? Okay, second part to that question is why did the colonists oppose it? What's your answer there, Sally?
colonists opposed it because it kept them from expanding westward into the land that they had already been granted due to the colonial charter.
Yeah, very good. The idea of it kept them from expanding, and also the fact that they felt they owned that land. You only need to have one aspect, but Sally did include both of those. So 1 point for each part of number 2. Any questions? All right, number 3. You're to name 3 of the acts of Parliament after the French Indian War that created tension between Great Britain and its colonies. Give me one, Jessica. The Stamp Act. Give me another one, Nate.
The Townsend Act.
The Townsend Acts. Give me another one, Joey.
The rate of taxation.
Writ of taxation.
Yeah.
Don't
Okay.
know where that came from. I don't recall that, so I don't think that one fits. Haley, what's another one? The Quartering Act. And let's see, I think we have maybe a couple we haven't mentioned. Michaela? The Sugar Act. Any more? Did we say the proclamation line? Yeah, could put that. Let's see. I think we got the rest of it. We said Stamp Act, right? Okay, so you get any three of those, and 3 points for those 3 acts. And number 4, what city was the site of a massacre in 1770? Megan,
Boston.
correct. All right, so we have 7 points on that page. Now we go to page 111. The first question is, why were the colonists offended by the decision to have the crown rather than the colony pay Governor Hutchinson's salary? What do you say, Sophia?
They were, because the crown was going to pay for his salary.
Yeah, that's what happened. Why were they offended by that? You just kind of said the same thing the question did. Stephen?
They felt like their rights were being stripped.
We think it'd be more specific than that. Caleb?
Because they cannot rein in officials with the purse after.
Exactly. They no longer had the power of the purse. All right, any question about your answer? Caleb had the idea that you could no longer rein in officials, or if you mentioned the power of the purse. Yeah.
I said they were offended because they were always men and wanted to control and govern themselves.
All right, I'll allow that. More specifically, though, related to control by having control over the purse strings or over the money that was being spent. Any others? Number 2, why did the colonists oppose the Tea Act of 1773, even though it provided tea at lower prices, bargain prices? So why did they oppose that? Hayden?
I had that the colonists opposed the Tea Act of 1773 because Parliament granted a monopoly on tea.
Exactly, because of the monopoly. Should have the word monopoly in there. Michaela?
I have, the colonists opposed the act because they wondered what Parliament would do next, if they would pass that for the monopoly.
Okay, we had the word monopoly, so that's what we're looking for primarily, if you have the word monopoly. And the only way in which I would not accept it if you said they like to sit around playing Monopoly. That wouldn't work, but otherwise, if you have the word monopoly in there, you probably have it right. Sally?
Use the words that I basically like described to.
I'll be the judge of that.
So I said that they didn't like it because they basically were seeing people really buy tea from them.
Okay, that would be a good description of monopoly. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Other questions? All right, number 3. Name and briefly describe each of the 4 coercive acts. I think I'll just give you this, and you see whether you have an acceptable answer. So, we have 4 parts of the coercive acts. You should have had the Boston Port Act. That would be 1 point. And then a subsequent point telling that it closed Boston Harbor until the sea was, until the tea was reimbursed or paid for. All right, so 2 points altogether on that part. Everybody have it? Any question? Okay, the next part was the Massachusetts Government Act, and that annulled the Massachusetts Colonial Charter. Another, again, 2 points. Any question? The third part of the act was the Act for the Impartial Administration of Justice, and that provided that British officials accused of committing crimes were to be tried in another colony or in Britain instead of Massachusetts. And you can leave out the other colonies if you don't have that, that's fine. Any question about your answer there? All right, and then the fourth one was the Quartering Act, and that made private homes available for British soldiers to live. Any question there? All right, so far on number 3 we have 8 points. And then there's one more point. What did the colonists call these acts? And for that, we'll call on Steph.
I don't have that one.
Oh, Lydia.
Number 4.
No, number 3.
I had that the colonists referred to as like the coercive acts.
No, that's what Parliament called it. What did the colonists call it? Haley? Say that again? Intolerable. Yeah, had a little trouble with the word. Intolerable acts.
Okay.
All right, so you had that,
Yeah, I remember.
and yet you told us something different.
Mhm.
You lied to us, Lydia. What are we to do now? Intolerable acts. So there are 9 points in number 3. How many of you didn't do the last question in there? Everybody did? So you're catching on to do all the questions? There a question? All right. Good. Usually it takes more than half a year for people to catch on to that. All right. Next, number 4. Why did the British Army send a force to Concord? They're looking for grapes, maybe. What, Nate?
They were going to attack a militia, like a storehouse with weapons.
Yeah, to destroy the munitions, to destroy the weapons and things that were there. Was the idea. Any question? Okay, go through and count up how many points you have off. 12 points, I think. That one. So we have 29 possible points. Put the number of points you have off at the top of your paper and circle it. And then pass it forward. I will collect it and record it at my leisure. If you have more than one page, staple it so they don't get separated.
Wait, can we put what we missed on both combined?
Just on the front page.
Okay, so both.
Combine, yeah, the whole thing. Put how many total you missed. It doesn't matter that much.
Okay, because I missed one on one page and that.
Since you're back there stapling them anyway, just lay them back there.
Why didn't you say what? That's reasonable.
And then when somebody turn off some lights when you get a chance, somebody passing by back there.
Yeah, she thought I was in back.
So I hope while people are stapling their papers together, it's along the line to do that you at home are able to simply contemplate, imagine where we're going next. This is where we've been. And next we're going to go to the shot heard around the world. Very interesting expressions and very interesting events that are going to be occurring here. You probably know about some of them already. But hopefully I'll be able to tell you some things you don't know. Use a paper clip now. Stapler doesn't make a. Oh,
I'm like,
is it out of staples?
No, it's just like bending them.
It's bending them?
I hate that so much.
Somebody maybe.
What?
I'll check.
How many do you
All right. Yesterday, we were looking at the First Continental Congress meeting. They called for a boycott of British goods. They said if the grievances were not redressed, they would meet again the next year. And we found that ultimately the petitions of the Continental Congress were rejected by the British government. Now we move on to the progression of things to the shot heard around the world. All right, in October 1774, Massachusetts responded by establishing a provincial Congress. What that means is that they basically had a government in exile. The British government had control of the government of Massachusetts, but the Massachusetts colonists established their own legislature apart from the one that was in the official control. So, provincial Congress. Secondly, there were militias organized. Patriot militias. That is, they're arming themselves. September 1st, 1774, General Gage, remember he's the one that's the governor over New England, and Massachusetts especially, ordered the capture of an arsenal of weapons stored in Charlestown, which is just south of Boston. I'm sorry, just north of Boston. And they successfully removed 250 barrels of powder to Boston. Thousands of armed militiamen from Massachusetts and other New England colonies then descended on Boston, having responded quickly to the rapid alarm system. They had set up a system between the militias to get word out quickly to the surrounding communities that if there was trouble, they could respond very quickly. And this was a good practice for them. They did respond. They came into Boston. No fighting took place. But what this was called the powder alarm it was, as I said, good practice for the mobilization of the new militia system. Hundreds of New Hampshire men descended on Fort William and Mary in Portsmouth Harbor on December 14, 1774. And there they seized muskets, cannons, shot, and 100 barrels of gunpowder. Paul Revere had warned them that the British were about to reinforce the fort that was garrisoned by a handful of invalid British soldiers, too ill or injured for regular duty. This is what the British did sometimes. They would send their wounded or ill or old soldiers to forts that weren't all that important. And when the Revere found out that the British were going to reinforce that fort, it was decided, let's go grab the stuff while we can. There were no casualties in this operation, more severe than a bloodied nose and some bruised British egos. In February 1775, having learned of carriages for cannons being built in a Salem forge, you understand what a carriage is for cannon? You know the cannon are on an axle with wheels. That's called the carriage. The cannon sits on that. And they were being built in Salem. General Gage marched 1,200 men there on a Sunday, while most of the townspeople were in church. The alarm had spread, however, by the time they arrived, and they found themselves confronted by a large and growing crowd of men and women who raised the drawbridge over the North River to prevent the British from reaching their target. Soon, hundreds of militiamen streamed into Salem from all directions, and the long-expected confrontation seemed set to begin. It looked like there was going to be war started right then. Colonel Leslie, the British commander, ordered the throng to allow his men to travel on what he termed the King's Highway. After all the highways belong to the king, in his perspective. And when he said that, a feisty old transplanted Englishman, James Barr, replied, "It is not the King's Highway. It is a road built by the owners of the lots on the other side, and no king, country, or town has anything to do with it." Basically, he's saying the highway belongs to us because we built it. Reminds me of what our former president said at one time when he told the people of this country, if you have a business, you didn't build it. You know, you couldn't have done what you did without government. And many people rose up and said, no, I built it. I built this company. I built this enterprise. It's mine. And the government didn't do it. Well, the simple declaration by James Barr evidences the American perspective that was true then and hopefully is still true today, that individual and property rights were of prime importance and worth fighting for. Well, at that point, the local minister came out and pled with the British soldiers not to fire on the civilian crowd and the more militia that were surging into the town. Colonel Leslie agreed to a compromise. Since it was too late in the day to carry out a search, which is what he was there to do, to search the town to find the carriages, he asked permission to advance his men across the bridge about 100 yards into Salem and back out again in order to fulfill the letter of his orders. Because what was he ordered to do? Go into Salem, and search for the carriages. So he said, if you just let me go into Salem, we'll come back out again, and I can say I did what I was told to do. As the British troops marched back to their transports, they were mocked all along the way. Not only were the munitions and cannon carriages preserved, but the incident became a propaganda tool, further emboldening the Patriots with the belief that they could face down the British soldiers who would not fire upon them. Now, that becomes an idea that is going to prove somewhat disastrous. They did not believe the British soldiers would fire on them. Well, to gauge such expeditions and seizures not only reduced the rebel militia's ability to fight, but also familiarized his troops with the terrain. So he felt that he was able to have his soldiers get accustomed with the terrain around, so he felt that these excursions were helpful to him. Gage also hoped to intimidate the Minutemen by the large troop movements. You know, on seeing these large amounts of troops coming here and there, he thought that would make the Minutemen afraid to come out against them, or at least make them tired of responding to all the alarms. But ironically, these forays gave the Patriots much needed experience and confidence that large numbers of militiamen could be mustered on short notice. It's at this time that we return to Patrick Henry. He once again gives a speech that is noteworthy in the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg, Virginia. The Americans of 1776 had the highest standard of living and the lowest taxes in the Western world. Farmers, lawyers, and business owners in the colonies were thriving, with some plantation owners and merchants making the equivalent of $500,000 a year. Times were good for many others, too. The vast majority of business owners and professionals were white males, of course, but that's certainly true of anywhere in the Western world at the time. But the British wanted a slice of that cash flow and tried to tax the colonists. They resisted violently, convinced that their prosperity and their liberty were at stake. And Virginia's Patrick Henry summed up their stance with the speech that he gave in the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg, Virginia. Here's a picture of what it looks like today. Still the same as it did back then. Here is the speech. I'm sure you've heard at least parts of it. And this is only a part of the speech. This is the end of the speech. And Patrick Henry said this: "There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, and which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no election. We have no choice. If we were base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat it, sir, let it come. It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty, or give me death." And that became the rallying cry for many patriots across the different colonies. Well, Gage is going to march on Concord. First, though, before we go into that, I want you to understand a little bit about the conditions of the British Army. We've got to try to understand what they were going through. Ironically, the Boston Port Act that Gage had commended or had recommended caused Gage's troops to suffer as well, because their rations were cut short. If there are not supplies coming in for the Americans, the Bostonians, there aren't any supplies coming in for the British either. Rum, however, was in abundance. And so the soldiers not having much food, not proper food, had plenty of rum. And that's always a good thing. That lends itself to men behaving well and all that, right? In addition, the soldiers were subject to the wave of infectious diseases that swept the city in the winter of 1774-1775. Lacking proper nourishment, proper winter clothing for the harsh New England winter, morale among the British soldiers was poor. Some even sold their guns in order to get money to buy food, and many others began to desert. Plots of farmland in New Hampshire were offered as inducement to deserters. Gage finally had to resort to public lashings and finally executions. A private who attempted to desert 3 different times was shot in the public square to the shock of Bostonians. Another one was shot on Christmas Eve. And British soldiers, wherever they went, were constantly being taunted, made fun of, mocked. Next we get to the real thing. By mid-April 1775, Gage had received orders from London to end the insurgency. He got orders, enough is enough. Stop messing around. End this thing. Well, that prompted him to pursue for real what had previously only been done for show. Gage's spies reported that Sam Adams and John Hancock were staying in the home of Reverend Jonas Clark in Lexington, and that munitions were hidden in neighboring Concord. So this provided an opportunity for Gage to go and take care of the leaders and grab some of their supplies as well. So Gage selected his best troops, light infantry, grenadier companies, and Royal Marines, to be commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith, an experienced soldier, and seconded by Major John Pitcairn, a battle-toughened Scot with 19 years of service and little sympathy for the Yankees. Although Gage attempted to keep his intentions secret, Bostonians quickly observed the light infantrymen and grenadiers being relieved from their routine duty, indicating that they were about to be deployed. They noticed a collection of numerous longboats from the fleet tied up to a man of war near the shore. Even so, Gage believed that he could keep secret the purpose and timing of the expedition. And it may be that he even that there was a spy in Gage's household who was feeding information to the Patriots. Next time we'll see what Gage does and how the colonists react in what will be called the shot heard round the world. Any questions?